Good morning, everyone. We are up to Perek Aleph, Mishna Tes. The previous Mishnah that we studied yesterday spoke about the halacha that you cannot separate processed oil, on unprocessed olives that are meant to be pressed for oil, or they started being crushed for the purposes of taking out their oil. And you were not permitted to do that. If you did it, it works, but you have to take off a second truma from the olives, midrabanan. And now we're going to have a case. Now we're going to have a Mishnah that talks about where it is permissible to separate truma from oil for olives, not for olive oil, olives. The tarmin shemen al zeisem bashim. We can take off truma from oil for olives that are preserved. These olives are preserved either in wine, or in brine, or in water to be eaten later. And they need truma to be taken from them. And the Mishnah says you may take from oil for them. And the reason is because both are processed. The oil is processed, and these olives are processed. They're not going to be turned into oil. That's not the purpose. They are preserved for eating. And therefore, being that both of them are preserved, there's no problem separating shemen, the oil, for these olives. The yayin al anavim la'aseisim tzimukim. You can separate truma from wine for grapes that are going to be made into raisins. Now, this needs a little bit more. These words need a little bit some elaboration. The first part of the Mishnah, the words said oil for olives that are preserved, which implies the olives are actually in a preserved state. They're in the brine, they're in the water, wherever they're being preserved. But when it comes to the grapes, the wine for the grapes, it says grapes to make them into raisins, which sounds like they're not made into raisins. Now, if you look at the Bar Tanura's commentary, it would sound like his version of the Mishnah was talking about raisins, not grapes that are waiting to be raisins, but raisins. And since they're raisins, that means that they're processed. And if they're processed, there's no problem with taking from the wine for the raisins because both are processed. But the wording of the Mishnah implies that even if these grapes are not yet raisins, but they are out the way we have the Mishnah, it implies that we're talking about grapes that are going to be made into raisins, which there are commentaries who understand it that way. And the same thing would be with the oil. If the oil for the olives, whether these olives are actually preserved, they're going to be preserved, it would be okay to separate from the oil for them or from the wine for the grapes that have been made into raisins. And the question is why? If they're not raisins yet, then they're not processed. So the wine is processed, the grapes are not fully processed. Why here do we say that you're allowed to do the wine for the seemingly unprocessed grapes, which we said before, you can't do that? And the answer that's given is that there's a difference between when you're talking about unprocessed grapes for wine, unprocessed olives for oil, unprocessed grain that needs to be threshed. And that is because those things, they need a lot of processing. There's a lot of processing that it's left to be done. It's a big effort to now complete the process of extracting the oil from the olives, the wine from the grapes, to thresh the grain. That takes a lot of processing. That is therefore called unprocessed produce, and you cannot separate from something processed from something that's unprocessed. But here we're talking about where the plan is to make them into raisins, or the plan is to preserve them. That is not considered something extenuous. It's not a lot. There's not a lot that has to be done for that, and therefore these grapes that you're planning on making, they're designated to be used for for raisins. They are already considered processed, meaning your plan is not to make wine. If your plan is to make wine, they are unprocessed. If your plan is just to make raisins, it's considered processed. That's considered processed. It's close enough to being processed to be able to fit into what the Torah wants when it says take from processed for processed. And therefore, here the Mishnah says, in this kind of case where it's the oil for the olives or the wine for the grapes, that are, again, not going to be pressed to take out their oil or to make wine, but rather to eat them as they are, either preserved or as raisins, that is considered processed for processed. Now, the Bartanura speaks out that when you separate from this oil for these, when you separate from the oil for the olives, the wine for the grapes, how do you calculate, based on what do you calculate, how much wine to take? So the way the Bartanura says is the amount of oil and wine one must designate as truma for the olives and grapes is based not on the volume of the olives and grapes themselves, but on the amount of oil and wine they are capable of producing. Okay? You have to look at these olives and these grapes, and although I'm not planning on making them into oil or into wine, I have to somehow or another figure out how much wine or oil could be produced from these things, and then separate accordingly from the wine and the oil that you're separating the truma for them from. Another point that's brought out is that our Mishnah only talks about that you're separating the oil for these kinds of olives, this wine for these kinds of grapes. But it doesn't say the other way around. Even though we say that the oil for the olives, for the preserved olives, is processed for processed, the Mishnah does not say vice versa. These olives that are going to be preserved for oil. Doesn't say you could do that. And the reason is because although from the point of the halacha of processed for processed, you have that here, but as we learned previously, there's also halacha by truma that you should take truma from the best that you have. And therefore, oil is definitely considered more choice and more desirable than these olives. And therefore, from the point of the halacha that you're supposed to take truma from the best of your produce, for truma from the best of what you have, that's not going to be fulfilled if you take from the olives for the olive oil. So although if you were to do it to work, but the Mishnah doesn't mention it because you're not supposed to do it that way, because you are supposed to be taking for truma from the best of what you have. Mishnah continues, Harei shetaram shemen al zeisim la'achila v'zeisim al zeisim la'achila. Let's say you went ahead and you took truma from the oil for these olives that will be eaten, or you took olives for olives that will be eaten. Meaning in a case where you took the truma from the oil for the olives that are going to be eaten. That's our example in the first part of the Mishnah. We say you can do that. That's not a problem. So too, similar olives. You can go ahead and do that. Olives for olives. You could also go ahead and do that. Olives for eating, not olives for processing, oil from them, but olives for eating, for other olives for eating. Same process. They're the same. They're both processed, and therefore, no problem separating truma from one for the other. The yayin ala navim la'achila v'anavim ala navim la'achila. Or let's say you separated wine for the grapes that are meant to be eaten, or grapes for grapes that are meant to be eaten. V'nimlach l'darchan. Then after you separated the truma, you decided that I'm not using these olives for preserving. I'm not using these grapes for raisins. I'm going to press them for oil and for wine. So it comes out now that the truma you took before is going to be working for something that now became unprocessed. Do we say that that's going to undo what you did before? The answer is, when that happens, v'nimlach l'darchan, you change your mind to press them, einoi tzarech litrayim, you need not take truma again. Being that at the time you took the truma, this was a proper truma, that was your plans at that point of time, and therefore the truma that was separated properly. The fact that later you change your mind doesn't affect what you did before. Now do the Sefer HaMitzvot. Mitzvahs lo yisaseh ala beis din shel lekabel edus ba'al avera. Prohibition on bezin to accept the testimony of a sinner. A sinner means a person who would be categorized halachically as a rasha, as an evil person, which means that he intentionally performs a sin that everybody knows is forbidden to do, and he's intentionally doing it. That would categorize him as a rasha, as an evil person. And the Torah prohibits such a person from being a witness. Shenemar, as it says, al tashes yadcha im rasha, Do not set your hand with an evil person. Liyos eid chamas, to be a malicious, to be a wrongful witness. So that goes on the beis din when it says don't place your hand with the evil person to be a malicious witness. The fact that he is a rasha invalidates him from being a witness. That is the eid chamas. That's what it says. Do not place your hand with the rasha to be a malicious witness. You're not allowed to accept his testimony. He's invalidated. Also included is the eid kosher, another person who's a kosher witness. He knows about another person that he is a rasha. He has fallen into the category of being a rasha, being an evil person. But the judges don't know about this about him. It is forbidden for that witness who is a valid witness. It's written to him to testify together with this person that he knows is invalid for being a rasha. Even if you know that what he's going to be testifying with you about is the truth. This is also included in do not place your hand with the evil person. All the more so, let's say you know that this evil person is planning on being even more evil and testifying falsely, then of course, if you know that's his plans, then of course, all the more so, it's going to be forbidden to testify with him. But it doesn't have to be that way. Even if you know that he's going to testify the truth, he is an invalid witness. This applies in all places and at all times. Next mitzvah, not to cause a person to stumble in any manner. Shenamar, as the pasuk states, before a blind person, not put a stumbling block. What does this mean? It doesn't just mean literally causing a blind person to fall over something. But Sulaimar, what it means to say is, the blind person in this pasuk is he's blind regarding this matter. And he's coming to ask you for a piece of advice. Do not give him inappropriate advice. Don't give him advice that's going to hurt him. He may want advice about something, and you know that if you set him on the wrong course, you're going to gain. You're not allowed to give him that piece of it. There's a specific prohibition by giving him bad advice. This includes all matters, whether it be regarding material matters, whether it's in regard to Torah matters. So the Torah prohibits us from giving bad advice regarding serving God. I mean, giving a person advice not to serve God properly, to actually transgress against what God wants. And therefore also, it is forbidden to bring or to aid or to cause a person to come to sin. It's not just a situation of giving him advice. It means if you're leading him in the wrong way, you're leading him in a path to sin, that's what's included in this prohibition. And therefore also included is to bring a person to sin. The classic case, the person's a nazir. He made a vow to be a nazir. He's willing to drink wine. You walk over to him and hand him a cup of wine. Didn't have to take it. Nonetheless, you're the one who made it possible for him to do the sin. If he does the sin, you are considered putting a stumbling block in front of him, and you have transgressed that prohibition. Now, the HaMitzvot adds something very interesting. Even when it comes to a non-Jew, you're not allowed to cause a non-Jew to transgress the prohibitions that the Torah put upon him, that were referred to as the 7 Noachide laws. To cause a non-Jew to transgress one of the 7 Noachide laws is included in this prohibition. Don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. This applies at all places, at all times, by men and by women. Have a great day.